Dead America presents The Soldier Day Zero, a multi-part serialized event. And now please enjoy Part 9. Chapter 1. Flint stopped just shy of the door, motioning for Anne to take a couple steps back and give him room to operate. "Do you remember where you parked?" he asked. "It's on the left side of the lot, second row, underneath the light post," Anne replied. He nodded and readied his cleaver, then gently pushed the door open just enough to peek outside. It took him a moment to scan the parking lot and locate Anne's vehicle among the scattered cars. His expression immediately dropped when he finally spotted the car. Several dozen zombies were swarming around the vehicle, as if someone had tried to make a run for it earlier and had fallen right in front of the car, attracting every creature in the immediate vicinity. Another dozen zombies stood between their current position and the parking lot, with the closest ones about 30 yards away from the door. "Well, somehow this is even worse than I thought it was going to be," Flint muttered. He let out a long sigh as he gently pulled the door closed, cutting off their view of the nightmare outside. Flint remained silent for several moments as he contemplated their other options, but was interrupted when Anne spoke up. "So it's that bad out there?" she asked. "There's about 100 of those people between us and the car," Flint replied grimly. "So, yeah, it's that bad out there," Anne said with resignation. Flint's first instinct was to abandon the mission and find someplace to hunker down. However, before he made that decision, he turned to Anne and spoke with intensity. "Level with me, Doc. How important are you?" he asked directly. "I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure how to answer that question," Anne replied. "You know what I mean, Anne," Flint pressed. "I have an idea on how to get to the car, but it's risky as hell," he explained. "And, to be quite frank with you, I'm willing to take that risk, but only if you're that important to understanding what's happening out there. So tell me, how important are you?" And thought about the question for a moment, weighing her words carefully before nodding and speaking with confidence. "I'm at the top of my field when it comes to understanding how viruses mutate," she said. "You said that there was a biological attack, right?" "Yeah, but that's all I know," Flint confirmed. "Well, whatever was released was clearly viral in nature, or else it wouldn't have spread all over the country this quickly," Anne explained. "Now, I have no idea if I'm going to be able to understand the virus or do anything to prevent it from mutating into something more dangerous, but I can guarantee that you're going to be hard-pressed to find someone more qualified than me to look into it." Flint gave her a knowing nod, understanding that her expertise made the risk worthwhile. "Yeah, I was afraid you were going to say that," he said. "So what's your plan on getting to the car?" Anne asked. "How fast of a runner are you?" Flint replied. "I'm not winning any medals, but if something's chasing me, I can move," Anne said. "Good, because I'm going to get the focus on me and clear the way for you," Flint explained. Anne's eyes widened as she stared at him in disbelief. "Are you kidding me?" she asked. "I'm not. But there's no other way to get you to the car," Flint said firmly. "So where are you running to?" Anne pressed. "Hopefully to the end of the lot and find a truck to get on top of," Flint replied. "And I'll swing by to pick you up," Anne added. "That's the plan," he confirmed. "You're a maniac, you know that, right?" Anne said, shaking her head. "If I wasn't a maniac, you would still be in the bar," Flint pointed out. Anne chuckled before reaching into her pocket and pulling out her car keys. She gave him a confident nod, even if she wasn't confident about going outside. Flint turned back to the door and unslung his rifle, mentally reminding himself that he only had 7 shots remaining. "Just run as hard as you can," he muttered to himself. "You got this. You got this." Despite his doubts, Flint threw open the door and darted out of the building into the night air. The parking lot stretched before him, filled with abandoned vehicles and wandering zombies that immediately began to take notice of his presence. He raced to the left for several yards before turning up toward the parking lot, getting within 20 yards of the first row of cars. Once he was in position, he fired a single shot into the air to announce his location to every zombie in the area. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Dozens of zombies that had been wandering aimlessly suddenly locked onto his position and began giving chase. Their excited moans filled the air as they pursued their fresh meal. Flint continued running hard across the asphalt, firing off another shot when he noticed that there were still some stragglers lingering near Anne's vehicle. The additional gunfire drew the attention of the remaining zombies, pulling them away from the car and toward his position. As he reached the edge of the parking area, a trio of zombies emerged from between parked cars directly in front of him. The creatures had been hidden in the shadows, but his gunfire had sent them into a frenzy and on a collision course. The sergeant narrowly avoided being grabbed by the lead creature, twisting his body at the last second to slip past its grasping hands. He managed to get by the zombie, but the encounter slowed his pace and allowed the pursuing horde to close some of the distance. Flint scanned the row of vehicles ahead of him, looking for something tall enough to provide safety from the growing mob. He saw nothing but sedans and compact cars that wouldn't get him high enough off the ground. The nearest truck was approximately 10 cars down on the left side of the lot. Given the number of ghouls that were now swarming toward his position, he realized he wouldn't be able to reach it on foot before being overwhelmed. "Damn it," Flint cursed under his breath. Instead of continuing his ground-level sprint, Flint adjusted course and raced toward the nearest car. He jumped up onto the hood, firing off another shot, and maintained the zombie's focus on his location. Rather than remain stationary and allow the creatures to surround the vehicle, he began running across the tops of the parked cars toward the distant truck. As he jumped from rooftop to rooftop, zombies began swarming the area directly below him. Their arms reached upward, trying to grab his boots or trip him up as he leaped between vehicles. He could feel their fingertips brushing against his boots, forcing him to jump higher with each passing car. As he reached the last car before the truck, one particularly tall zombie managed to clip the front of his foot just as he was launching into his jump. The contact threw him off balance in midair, causing him to lose his trajectory toward the truck bed. In desperation, Flint planted his good foot on the car roof and pushed off with everything he had, using the remaining contact with the vehicle to generate additional lift and distance. The maneuver was awkward and uncontrolled, but it was his only chance of reaching safety. He soared through the air, off balance, his arms windmilling as he tried to correct his position before landing. The truck bed rushed up to meet him, and he crashed down hard on his shoulder, the impact knocking the air from his lungs and sending waves of pain through his upper body. Before he could fully recover from the landing, several zombie arms appeared over the edge of the truck bed, grasping at him from multiple directions. Flint smacked the grasping hands away while scrambling to his feet, frantically aiming his rifle around to check for any zombies that might be tall enough to reach him. His shoulder throbbed from the impact, but he forced himself to ignore the pain and focus on the immediate danger. After a moment, he gathered himself and realized that despite the scare, he was relatively safe from the dozens of zombies that were now swarming around the base of the truck. The vehicle's height provided just enough elevation to keep him out of their reach, though they continued their attempts to reach up and grab him. Flint looked back toward the building entrance, where a few zombies still remained in Anne's path to her car. He muttered curses under his breath as he raised his rifle and pulled the trigger several more times to draw those final creatures toward his position. "Come on, Doc, get to the car," he said, watching the building entrance intently. A few seconds later, Anne emerged from the building, right on schedule. She was running hard toward her vehicle, moving with the determination of someone who understood that hesitation meant death. Flint watched intently as she made it to the parking lot, pushing through the scattered line of remaining vehicles and reaching her car without incident. The engine started immediately, and Anne began driving toward his position in her sedan. Within moments, Anne was pushing through the horde of zombies that surrounded the truck. Creatures were shoved aside or knocked down as the vehicle plowed through them, their bodies creating dull thuds against the car's frame and bumper. Once the sedan was positioned directly beside the truck, Flint slung his rifle over his shoulder and prepared for the most dangerous part of his plan. He took a deep breath and leapt off the truck bed with both feet, flying through the air toward the barely moving vehicle below. The distance was short, but the timing was critical. Too early, and he would miss the car entirely. Too late, and he would land on the rear bumper or trunk. Flint landed flat on the roof of Anne's car with a metallic thud that resonated through the vehicle's frame. He immediately reached forward, grabbing onto the lip where the roof connected to the windshield, trying to establish a secure grip on the moving vehicle. Almost immediately, he felt several zombie hands grasping at his legs and boots as creatures that had been chasing the car managed to get close enough to reach him. Their fingers clawed at his uniform, trying to pull him off the roof and into their waiting jaws. "Drive, drive, drive," Flint shouted. Anne didn't hesitate, slamming her foot down on the accelerator and peeling out of the parking area. The sudden acceleration nearly threw Flint off the back of the car, and he managed to hold on only by his fingertips as the vehicle shot forward. Even as they picked up speed, a couple of determined zombies continued trying to pull him off the roof, their hands maintaining contact with his boots until the car's velocity finally broke their grip. Anne sped down the parking lot, weaving between abandoned vehicles and debris. As they reached the exit, she cut the wheel hard to the right to navigate around a blockage, nearly throwing Flint off the side of the car with the sharp turn. As they reached the street and put several hundred yards between themselves and the zombie mob, Flint knocked on the windshield. "Stop the car! Stop the car!" he yelled. Anne immediately slammed on the brakes, not realizing that the sudden deceleration would send Flint tumbling over the front of the vehicle. He hit the asphalt hard, rolling several times before coming to a stop on the pavement. Anne threw open her door and rushed to check on him as he staggered back to his feet, clearly shaken but apparently uninjured. "I'm so sorry, are you okay?" she asked with concern. Flint muttered curses under his breath as he made his way around to the driver's side of the vehicle, his body aching from being tossed off the roof. "Get in the passenger seat. I'm driving," he ordered. Anne complied without argument, climbing into the passenger seat as Flint settled behind the wheel. He sat there for a brief moment, catching his breath before throwing the car into drive. With a final look back at the casino complex they were leaving behind, Flint hit the gas and began their desperate race to reach Barksdale Air Force Base before the last evacuation flight departed. Chapter 2. Flint drove the duo down the darkened street that ran along the river, the sedan's headlights cutting through the night as they put distance between themselves and the casino. The road was quiet for the most part, with only scattered debris and abandoned vehicles indicating that anything unusual had occurred. However, they could hear sirens going off in the distance, echoing across the water from various parts of the city. The sergeant drove them approximately a mile before stopping the vehicle in the middle of the road. "Is everything okay, Flint?" Anne asked, noting his hesitation. "I'm just trying to get my bearings," he replied. "How long have you been stationed here?" Anne inquired. "Not long at all," Flint admitted. "In fact, the first time I left base was tonight." Anne's eyebrows raised at this revelation. "Well, lucky for you, I grew up here, and I have no problem being your navigator," she offered. Flint let out a chuckle. "That's a relief, because I honestly have no idea where I'm going," he confessed. "If we can get up on the highway, head away from the river for an exit and we'll be on the right path," Anne explained. Flint nodded and began accelerating toward their objective, but slowed down again once the highway entrance came into view. "I think we're going to need a plan B," he said grimly. The entrance to the highway was completely blocked by an abandoned fire engine that sat sideways across the ramp. The truck's emergency lights were still flashing red and blue, creating an eerie strobe effect in the darkness. but there was nobody around to explain why it had been left in such a position. Flint examined the sides of the ramp, hoping there might be a path around the truck. However, there were steep drop-offs on either side of the roadway, and he didn't want to risk damaging the car or getting stuck in a ditch. As they sat there considering their options, a couple of zombified firefighters emerged from around the blocked truck. The creatures were still wearing their heavy, fireproof suits, which made their movements somewhat clumsy, but also more intimidating. The zombies immediately locked onto the sedan and began sprinting toward them, their boots pounding against the asphalt. When they reached the vehicle, they began smacking their gloved hands against the glass windows, their vacant eyes staring through the barriers at the living prey inside. Flint let out a sigh before releasing the brakes and driving away from the blocked entrance. They drove several blocks down the street before Anne spoke up. "Hang a right up here," she instructed, pointing toward an upcoming intersection. Flint followed her directions, turning onto the cross street as requested. However, he was forced to slam on the brakes almost immediately. Several dozen zombies were scattered along the block, wandering between parked cars and storefronts. When the creatures heard the sound of the car engine, many of them turned toward the noise and began running in their direction. "Can we drive through them?" Anne asked. "Maybe," Flint replied, though his voice carried uncertainty. He trailed off as he noticed even more creatures emerging from the side streets, drawn by the commotion of the first group's response to their vehicle. "Well, maybe not," Flint amended as he muttered curses under his breath. "We need to find a way to move to the east, at least a mile," Anne said. He threw the car into reverse, hitting the gas and backing up rapidly down the street. When he had enough room to maneuver, he cut the wheel sharply to turn the vehicle around. Anne held onto the handle above the passenger door to steady herself as Flint executed the sharp turn and pointed the car back toward the highway area they had just left. "Where are we going?" she asked, clearly confused by the change in direction. "The base is close to the river, right?" Flint asked instead of answering directly. "Yeah, it is, but why?" Anne replied. "With the way the city is falling apart, I don't think we're going to make it a block, let alone a mile deeper into it," Flint explained. "So we're going to go the other way." Anne thought about his logic for a moment, running through the local geography in her mind. After considering it for a moment, she began nodding in agreement. "That could actually work," she said. "There's a public boat dock just across from the base. We'll just have to figure out a way to get across the water." Flint hit the accelerator just before the front edge of the zombie mob that had been pursuing them could reach their position. He picked up speed quickly, racing back toward the highway area while the creatures gave chase on foot behind them. When he approached the area where the blocked exit ramp was located, he cut the wheel hard to the left to access the entrance ramp instead. "Be empty, be empty, be empty," Flint chanted, trying to will the ramp to be clear of other vehicles. He continued his mantra as they climbed the curved ramp toward the main highway. His heart rate increased as they approached the top, knowing that a collision at high speed would likely be fatal for both of them. As they crested the ramp and merged with the highway, Flint spotted the headlights of a massive tractor-trailer speeding down the roadway in their lane. "Oh shit!" Flint exclaimed. He quickly jerked the steering wheel to adjust their course, but there wasn't enough time to completely avoid contact. The side of the truck scraped along the passenger side of Anne's car, sending a shower of sparks flying and tearing off the side mirror with a loud crash. Flint managed to get them onto the shoulder of the highway, where he brought the vehicle to a stop. Both occupants sat breathing heavily as they processed how close they had come to a fatal accident. "Yeah, sorry about that," Flint said, glancing over at Anne to make sure she was uninjured. "It's all good," Anne replied, though her voice carried the tension of someone who had just experienced a near-death experience. "I'm sure the military can give you a new paint job," Flint offered with a smirk. Anne chuckled and shook her head at the empty promise. "Just get us across the river, Flint," she said. The sergeant nodded before checking to make sure the coast was clear, no headlights appearing to be coming their way. He floored it once they were in the right direction, speeding to the bridge over the river. Chapter 3. As they drove toward the bridge, Anne looked back toward the city they were leaving behind, getting a better vantage point from the raised highway. She fought back tears as she spotted bright orange spots scattered throughout the urban landscape, clearly from fires that were burning out of control. "My God, this is horrific," Anne whispered. Flint tried to think of something comforting to say, but he knew there wasn't anything he could offer that would make a meaningful difference. The situation was horrific, and Flint suspected it was only going to get worse when the sun came up and more people began leaving their homes. He got them across the river without incident, taking the first exit on the other side but stopping halfway down the ramp when he spotted movement on the street below. Not wanting to give away their position, he cut the headlights and let the car coast to a stop. "I don't suppose you have your phone on you?" Flint asked. "It's in the glove box," Anne replied. She opened the compartment and rummaged around for a moment before locating the device and powering it on. "Don't take offense to this, Anne, but what kind of psycho leaves their cell phone in the glove box?" Flint asked with amusement. "It was the Bachelorette's rule," Anne explained. "No distractions and, more importantly, no photographic evidence of what happened." Flint let out a chuckle at the explanation. "And here I am thinking that all you academic types were straight-laced and buttoned down," he said. "Clearly you never spent time in graduate school, Flint," Anne replied with a grin. "We work hard, but when we need a stress reliever, we know how to party." "So what you're saying is, I need to go back for my master's?" Flint asked playfully. "I'll make you a deal," Anne said. "You get me back to base safe, and I'll write you a letter of recommendation." "Sounds good to me, Doc," Flint agreed. Anne finished powering up her phone and clicked on the GPS application before handing the device over to him. The screen displayed their current location and the surrounding area in detail. "I assume this is what you wanted," she said. The sergeant nodded as he studied the device, zooming out to get a broader view of their position. He moved the map around, looking for any kind of dock or boat launch on their current side of the water. While nothing obvious stood out as a public boat ramp, he noticed a small business icon near the riverbank that caught his attention. "Is this place what I think it is?" Flint asked, showing the listing to Anne. She looked at the screen and nodded with recognition. "Yeah, they rent kayaks and canoes so people can go out into the river," she confirmed. "How do you feel about a little boat trip?" Flint asked. "You may have to do most of the paddling, but I'm in," Anne replied. "If it gets me into a party school, then I got you covered," Flint said with a playful wink, hoping to keep her spirits up despite their dangerous situation. Anne let out a smile at his attempt at humor as the sergeant released the brakes and gently pressed the accelerator. The car picked up speed quickly as they descended the ramp. Flint switched the headlights back on just before they reached the bottom, illuminating several zombies that had been wandering around in the darkness. The creatures were looking around in confusion, struggling to locate the source of the engine noise they'd been hearing. The sudden appearance of the headlights immediately focused their attention on the approaching vehicle. Flint cut the wheel hard to the left, causing the rear end to skid on the pavement. The sliding motion caused them to smack into a couple of the zombies, sending the creatures flying through the air before they crashed back down onto the asphalt. It took a moment for the tires to regain traction on the road surface, but within seconds they were speeding down the street toward their destination. Anne followed their progress on the GPS display, keeping track of their location and the route they needed to take. Meanwhile, Flint focused intently on the road ahead, weaving between zombies that had wandered into their path. There were scattered wrecked vehicles throughout the area, some with their doors hanging open and others that appeared to have been abandoned in the middle of the street. The sergeant didn't slow down to check if anybody might still be alive inside any of them. Even if there were survivors in the vehicles, He didn't have the bullets or the time to help them out. After several minutes of navigating through the suburban streets, Flint began slowing down as he looked for a specific turn. Anne caught on to what he was doing and called out the direction. "It's 2 blocks up, just hang a left," she said, reading from the GPS. "It's so nice having a navigator," Flint said appreciatively. "I had to save a guy's life just to get directions to the casino. I still can't believe they sent someone with no knowledge of the city out into this mess," Anne said, shaking her head at the poor planning. "In their defense, I was on a team that knew the city well," Flint explained. Anne fell quiet as she processed the implications of what he was saying. If he had been part of a team and was now operating alone, it meant that something terrible had happened to his fellow soldiers. "I'm sorry, Flint. I didn't mean to," Anne began, but trailed off as she realized she might be opening old wounds. "It's war, and shit like that happens in war," Flint said matter-of-factly. Anne didn't respond immediately, not wanting to upset him further by dwelling on the subject. While he had only known the men for a short time, their loss was clearly still affecting him on some level. Flint kept his foot pressed firmly on the accelerator, pushing the car to maintain high speed as they raced down the street toward the boat rental facility. He began slowing down once he could see the river in the distance, eventually coming to a stop just before the road that ran parallel to the waterfront. "Can I see the phone?" he asked. Anne handed the device back to him, allowing the sergeant to study the GPS display more carefully. He examined their position relative to the rental business, noting that it appeared to be about a block up the river road on their left. "Okay, hang tight, but get ready to move, because we might not have much time once we get there," Flint warned. "I'll be ready to move when you tell me to," Anne assured him. Flint nodded and pressed the gas pedal lightly, cutting off the headlights to mask their approach as much as possible. When they got within half a block of their destination, he applied the brakes again as the scene ahead came into sharp focus. "Looks like we weren't the only ones with this idea," Flint observed. There were several abandoned cars scattered around the parking lot of the boat rental facility, and zombies were swarming throughout the area. The creatures appeared to be congregating around the vehicles, suggesting that other people had attempted the same escape route. "Maybe we could swim for it," Anne suggested. "I don't know what the current is like, but there's a decent chance we end up miles downriver before we're able to get across," Flint replied. "At least with the boat we can paddle against the current without worrying about drowning." "So what do you want to do?" Anne asked. Flint ejected his rifle magazine and checked his remaining ammunition, counting only 3 bullets left. Their firepower situation was even more dire than he'd thought. "Well, we're not shooting our way out of this," he said with resignation. Anne went deep into thought for a moment, her expression suggesting she was working through some kind of idea. Her sudden concentration confused Flint. "You got something?" he asked. "I've been here before, and they have stacks of rubber rafts sitting near a little beach area," Anne explained. Flint thought about her suggestion for a moment before catching on to what she was proposing. When the full implications of her plan became clear, he let out a bitter laugh. "Well, you said you knew how to party. I just wasn't prepared for how hard you went," he said with admiration. "Do you think it could work?" Anne asked. "My only concern is the paddles," Flint replied. "There are small ones attached to the sides, at least from what I remember," Anne said. "Okay, then yeah, I think it could work," Flint agreed. "We pick up as much speed as we can, hit the stacks, and hope like hell we can carry one of them into the water with us." "Well, when you say it out loud," Anne began, her voice trailing off as the full absurdity of the plan became apparent. "Yeah, I know. That's why I usually just go without thinking," Flint said. "Let's do that from now on," Anne agreed nervously. Flint let out a laugh as he noticed the clear fear on Anne's face despite her attempt to appear confident. He gave her a reassuring pat on the arm, trying to let her know that everything was going to work out, though the gesture did little to settle her nerves. "Hang on tight, Anne, because here we go." Will Sergeant Flint and Dr. Caldwell reach the river safely? Be sure to tune into the next exciting episode of The Soldier, Day Zero to find out.